So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about who we are as an agency, and we'll talk a lot about disproportionality, my PICO, implementation, findings and lessons learned, and then finally we'll have space for questions. So who are we? So in Florida, I don't know if most of you know, we are a privatized state, which means that the Department of Children and Families contracts out all the work from foster care to licensing to adoptions. And I actually represent Eckerd County, Eckerd Connects, which is in Hillsborough County. And this is just a little bit about the kids that we have in our care. We currently have 3,100, a little over 3,100 children placed in out-of-home care. And just think about that. That's a county has that many children in care. In 2018, fiscal year 2018 to 2019, DCF gives us, the Department of Children and Families, gives us a goal, an adoption goal. This is the one thing I kind of don't like about privatization is that there's a lot of performance measures, but they're all aligned to numbers instead of people. So I spend a lot of time redirecting our leadership about 383 adoptions is 383 children that we want to get out of care and into permanency. We were able to actually achieve 296 adoptions, which was no easy task considering we had massive transitions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then as of July 1, we had 62 children without an identified home. And then over 300 children in identified adoptive placements were needing to be finalized. So that's relatives, that's foster families that wanted to adopt, and a lot of our work was really paperwork. So I want to sit on this slide for just a minute and share with you one of the things that I love about being a part of this fellowship is learning so much about disproportionality and disparity. And then it got me thinking, okay, so what does our state look like overall? And in a study that was done by the National Council of Juvenile and Foster Care Judges in 2017, it indicated that the state of Florida is at 1.5. So that means that African American children are 1.5 times as represented in foster care as they are in the general population. So then I started thinking, okay, so what does Tampa look like? It's the same. That is a hard fact for me because I'm tasked with finding and ensuring that finding forever families, but ensuring that the adoption work is happening in the way that matters. So one of the things that I had to do when I first started as the director of adoption was go out and meet with adoptive families. So I thought I'm going to go out to one of our contracted post-adoption sites, and I'll go in there and I'll do a talk on, I don't know, transracial adoption. Let's do that. I show up to this meeting at 6 o'clock on a rainy Tampa night, and over 80 families showed up. And that was the largest. They didn't even have chairs. They didn't even have enough chairs for all the families that showed up. And I was like, wow, you guys have a great post-adoption support group. And they were like, no, we're here to see you. Yeah. Oh, okay, great. I never did the talk on transracial adoption because families wanted to talk to me about the work that wasn't being done, right? How long they had to wait for a home study to be done. Many of the families there had children in their homes for 3-4 years, ready with an open plan of adoption, and they had never even seen their adoption home study. Never signed it, didn't even know if it was done, and they were still just waiting. And it wasn't, if it was one family, that's one thing, but there were so many, I ran out of business cards that night. So I had to just start handwriting an email to get to the bottom of it. And so I went back the very next day and met with my staff and asked them, what's going on here? And it was all about capacity, right? We don't have the capacity. We don't have the resources to get everyone where they needed to go. So I started pulling some research. And in 2014, African American children made up about 15% of the US children being adopted, but accounted for 24% of the children in foster care. A 2007 survey of adoptive parents sponsored by the Department of Health and Human Services indicated that 40% of all adoptions were transracial. So I had another issue, right? We had all these children in care. How many of them were African American children? And are they waiting the longest? They were. So I went to one of my favorite sites, one of my favorite resources. If you haven't been here, you should. The Donaldson Adoption Institute shared this. Transracial adoptions can provide much needed homes for boys and girls who may not otherwise have them. It is important to address the potential challenges in this growing practice in order to best serve everyone involved, especially the children. And that's the part that got me, the part where it says especially the children. So I went back to my staff, shared a lot of these quotes, shared a lot of data. My staff didn't even know, and I don't know how many of your staff know the disproportionality rate. It's really important to do that. I think one of the things that I loved about this fellowship too was the ability to use data to drive the work. I think oftentimes data is used to point out what people aren't doing well, but I needed to also see, okay, so what are we doing right? What's working? And then use what's not working, or the data that shows what's not working, to give people hard numbers, right? So my staff thought they were amazing and stellar until I brought them the data and until we talked about disproportionality. So it was definitely helpful for me. So that brings me to my Pico. Isn't she cute? She is. If prospective adoptive families receive a family-centered approach to the adoption match process in Hillsborough County, will the number of adoptions for children of color increase? That was a big task. When I started this Pico, I didn't even have the piece about children of color, but Sherilyn, as you all know, said, what else can we do? What else can we focus on? And this was definitely something that was near and dear to my heart. So we had some assumptions, some rationales that kind of started driving my work. One was that families, as I told you when I met with them, they had reported that there is a lack of communication between the adoption case manager and the prospective adoptive family. I don't know how you can honestly match a child if you don't communicate with a family. Case managers appeared to struggle with preparing families and children for adoption, and what I learned was they didn't really know a lot about adoptions or the complexities of it. So what were we going to do about that? Then I had my staff pull some data, and 44% of potentially matched adoptive families shared that after participating in our full disclosure meeting, they felt misled by case management and decided not to adopt that child. I'll tell you more about why, because there's always a why behind things like that. And then the goal of enhancing the recruitment process in Tampa, Florida, is to reduce the number of youth children in out-of-home care to sustainable placements. Tampa currently has 3,115 children in out-of-home care placement. And that varies. They're not all adoptable children, but. So that's, for any of you who went out with me last night and met my lovely husband and our son, that's the day we met our son at the hospital, because we adopted him. So I wanted to share that. Isn't he cute? Eckert's previous adoption recruitment. So we had match staffings, which are great. I think it's an opportunity for us to meet families face to face, but we weren't doing that. We were reading a home study, deciding as a professional team, kind of, does this look good? Does this family have a big backyard? Do they live in the right part of town? Instead of building a relationship. Then the adoption home studies. We wouldn't give families a copy. Maybe you guys have heard this because this was hard for me to hear, but we wouldn't give families a copy of their adoption home study because we didn't want them to go somewhere else, right? Yeah. And use it. Yes. Could they read it? That would be a great thing. Could they actually see if what you drafted was their real life story? How do you know you got their story right? They didn't. And then family engagement. If you do these two things, right, you change the match staffing and the adoption home study process, you're going to naturally build relationships with people. And they're gonna feel like they can trust you. So, my first focus was really changing our agency culture. We didn't do a good job of caring for kids, we didn't do a good job of caring for families, and somehow we were doing over 300 adoptions every year. Just think about that. So are those adoptions sustainable? How are we ensuring that they have everything that they need? I don't know. So I started kind of this talk with my staff about adoption professionals can have, the best intentions must be followed up with action. And action requires engagement. Action requires knowing your case well. Action requires caring about your job and the work that you do. But we also must remember that adoption is a service for children and families and not a chore or an afterthought. I found that in Florida, in Tampa specifically, we have 3 case management organizations that I kind of oversee all their adoption work. And that was a big, big part of what I saw from case management, what I heard from them. They were tired, overworked, underpaid, often got called out on the things they weren't doing. We know all the stories, but it was very eye-opening for them to hear, like, this is a service we're providing to children and families, and we need to make sure we're doing it well. So, my 4 phases of implementation, I was a little, I was in a space where I talked to Valerie a lot about this. I felt like I needed to just revamp all of adoptions to make it family friendly, to make it child centered, to make it best practice. So I decided that I was going to tackle these 4 pieces. I was going to tackle the match staffings, maximize the use of our digital recruitment tools. Adoption home studies was going to be a criteria, and then we were going to focus on family engagement, which incorporated our orientation, our trainings, and our interviews. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So match staffings. We decided, as I said earlier, families would not be invited to come to the match staffings to present how their strengths meet the needs of this child. And we just read home studies and made decisions and signed off and said, okay, you're matched to this child, via email, by the way. Never called them. So that had to change. So I required families need to come in-house to meet with a professional team to talk about who they are, right? We can have a licensing worker come and talk about them, but you know your story, right? Everybody has a story. Share your story with us, face to face. That allowed for some connection, and then we know what they would need beyond the adoption to provide support. So, the second piece was utilizing our recruitment tools. One of the things about Tampa, a big part of my career was in North Carolina. One of the things that I love about Tampa is our Heart Gallery. Our Heart Gallery is amazing, they're phenomenal. If it weren't for them, I don't know that we would get to 300 adoptions every year. But there were some things that we needed to kind of change. So we needed to partner better, we needed to revamp our match process by using the Heart Gallery. So first, let's talk about our children. Race. So you can see we have 36% of the kids on our Heart Gallery were Caucasian, 14% were Hispanic, 38% were Black. Biracial was 1%, and then biracial Black and Hispanic was 1%, and then biracial Black and white was 11%. And some of this data to me is a little skewed, I feel like. It's all based on how the case manager identifies the child, right? And we know there's lots and lots of errors in that. So, we needed to maximize the use of our digital recruitment tools. So the Heart Gallery, Family Match, and the Adoption Exchange. I had my staff kind of tell me, how many kids do we have available? Are they all on the sites that they're supposed to be on? And what we found out was they weren't. When I first got to Tampa, just on the Adoption Exchange alone, only 38% of our kids were reflected on that site. So we have the tools, are we actually using them? We weren't. So made a list of all kids that should be on the Adoption Exchange, on Heart Gallery and Family Match, sent it out to case managers, gave them a deadline to do it. Right? Reasonable, it's gotta be reasonable. And to date, I would say that we are at, I wanna get this number right, 96% of most of our kids are on there. The ones that aren't, so we should be at 100, but some kids are therapeutically struggling right now, and a few of those are teens who don't want to be recruited for in that way. So we have to become strategic about how we're going to still ensure that we're doing diligent recruitment for them. So family match. Well, one more thing. I want to go back just a second. I know I'm going to run out of time. Heart Gallery. So one of the things that we changed with the Heart Gallery was when I went and met with the Heart Gallery executive director, she said to me, hey, can you help us? We have all these families calling. They want to meet the children, but the staff are not calling them back. I mean, we have families waiting for months and months and months for someone to even just say, this child's still available. So we decided we would bring in, for our family match events, we have 4 a year, where we take the kids to, let's say like a Dave and Buster's or a bowling alley, and we have prospective adoptive families come and meet them. But we weren't strategic about how we were doing that. We weren't saying, well, who's been asking for these kids, right? Which children were they asking for? And bring those people to the room. And so we did that last year. We were very successful with that because families got an opportunity, before we even came to a match staffing, to meet kids. Play with them, have fun, enjoy themselves. And kids were so distracted by the fun that they didn't realize they were kind of relationship building. So family match. So family match is relatively new to Florida. And I was really apprehensive when I first started working with them, because what they promise, what they hope is, they got folks from Match.com who developed that whole database, that whole system, and said, why don't we do it for adoptions? And I was like, oh, that's adoption recruiter's job. Like, we can't have a software looking at our kiddos and deciding what happens. So what I did was I made it part of our process. Instead of saying this is the only recruitment tool we're going to utilize, it's just an additional tool. And it might help us kind of figure out, and what they look at specifically is the strengths of this family. Does it align with the needs of this child? And can they meet it? And they give you a compatibility. They'll say, oh, Jamie and John are matched at Johnny at 98%. So that might be a way to consider, that might be a family to consider to bring to a match staffing. And that's how you bring them into the room without just relying on technology. So since their implementation 11 months ago, they've had 179 matches across the state of Florida. Matches are great, but is it an adoption, right? Is it adoptable? So that's the other piece. They've had 81 placements. That means we've matched them, now we're placing them. And then they've had to date 35 adoptions. So as you can see, you start with 179, you have 81 placements, 35 adoptions. That told me something. And this is across the state of Florida. We still have some work to do on how we actually support and match children to families. But this slide was incredible for me to see. So when I first started working with Family Match, I had just had our class on disproportionality and disparity. So my first question to them was, you want to do this across the state of Florida? Talk to me about the kids on your site. What's their race, ethnicity? Talk to me about the race and ethnicity of the families on your site. Well, we're not capturing that. Why is that relevant? You want to work with child welfare, it has to be relevant. So I sent them our disproportionality rates, and here's where we're at in Tampa. Like, we need to be able to have a robust conversation about the hard stuff. So this slide was directly created, this lithograph was directly created because of that conversation. If you want to utilize this business, right, this business opportunity, you're gonna have to leverage it and talk about the race and ethnicity of our children in care. And so, a few things to know is the children that were getting matched, the highest percentage rate were white children on the site. 21% were African American, and 9.9% were Hispanic or Latino. But if you look at, where is it? If you look at the ages of kids, so that's the other piece that I had to think about, right? How many kids do we have in care? Because my staff were saying, well, we're not giving them adoption home studies because they're going to take it somewhere else and adopt a baby. And we've got 13, 15, 16-year-olds that need families too. So I wanted to see how many kids are on this site that are over the age of 10. We had 60% were over the age of 10, 30% were under 10. So that was good because I feel like we need to get those kids across the state. So that was a whole new philosophy shift for our agencies too, was they wanted to grow these families in locally and utilize them, but some of those families weren't the right fit for our kids. So open up the state, let's do something different, let's be creative. Adoption home studies. So families told me they were not timely. So one family waited 11 months for a home study after her training, after she submitted all her paperwork, 11 months, and still hadn't seen it. It was done, by the way, but she hadn't seen it. We needed to do them timely. So one of the things that I implemented is, with my staff, 60 days from the time you receive that completed packet, I better have that home study on my desk to review and to make sure that it's thorough, and then have the family review it and make whatever corrections they feel like you didn't get right. But then we needed to upload it. So we have this whole huge database called FISPIN, and when I started, they had rolled out, Valerie and her people had rolled out the home studies have to be uploaded into FISPIN. What wasn't happening? It wasn't happening timely, they weren't in there, and that would allow the state adoption case managers to read the home studies when they could. And again, it's this philosophy shift of we have families across the state, don't just narrow it down to your circuit. And so what does MIPA say? MIPA is, as you all know, is federal. We have to kind of adhere to it and follow it. And one of the things that I think we get too caught up in is we can't we can't delay a child's permanency because of race and ethnicity, right? We can't discriminate if a Caucasian couple wants to adopt an African American child, we can't discriminate it if it's a good fit. But we always miss the part about diligent recruitment of families. I don't know how we missed that, but we always miss that. We need to be intentional about going into those communities, meeting those families. I think you were talking yesterday, Maricela, about going into the churches, right? You need to get there, be the face, be the voice, build relationships, and find the families that look like our kids. That's our job, that's our task. And I don't know that we do that well. So that was, I had to keep that in the forefront and remind my staff was so focused on, well, we can't discriminate, that they forgot the rest of it that talks about, well, how are we diligently recruiting? So I remember sitting with the adoption supervisor whose work falls under me and just asking her, so can I ask you a question? How many families are in our PPT, our math class? And she tells me, 25, okay. What is the demographics of that group? Any Latino families, any African American families? She's like, well, no, they're all white. Well, who chooses them? Well, I do. Right. Okay, so let's talk about that. So we have 1.5 disproportionality rate. We know that we have way too many kids in care, but we're not inviting those families into our classes. And she was like, well, and so I could see her kind of chiming in. I had to go back to our orientation. So our orientation really consists of over 100 people come to our adoption orientation every month. Tampa is an anomaly, right? We don't have our issue, I've told Sherilyn over and over again, our issue is not finding families. It's treating them well and keeping them through the long journey that's about to come, right? So we had to switch how we were doing all of that work. And that leads me to family engagement. So the first thing I asked for were, show me our orientation slides. And I sat in a few of them, and I was like, oh my goodness. So our orientation slides literally were our administrative adoption codes. It was very hard for me to sit in those orientations and not say a word. Okay. And I bring a different perspective, right? I'm an adoptive mom. So I always try to carry that lens with me, and that helps me navigate my work. So I looked at my staff after like the third one, I could only sit through 3, and said, we need to revamp this orientation. We can't, this isn't working. Well, we want to make sure that they know what we're looking for. And I said, but are we what they're looking for? This is a mutual selection. And you guys are making it seem like, I got your baby and I'll give it to you if I want to. That's not how we do this work, right? We want their business. This is a business transaction, right? And it's emotional, but we want their business. So how are we going to do that if all we're talking to them about is the law and how they don't qualify? That's not best practice and that's not good work. So we revamped the orientation, you'll be happy to know, and we took our slide of like 45 slides down to 10 and left the space for people to ask questions, and my staff were afraid of the questions. Well, what if Tampa's also a hub for the media coming to all of our events and trying to catch us out there? You know your work. You are the expert in the room. Own your work. And that's the other piece, I think, over the course of this and because of transformational leadership, really helping my staff understand, you are the experts. Own the work, own the journey, and be brave as you do it. And then I wanted to incorporate something that we did in North Carolina, which was, so we would have in Florida right now, we would have families come to orientation, and then they'd fill out a survey, and based on what they answer on their survey would determine whether they got in or out of the class. Families didn't know that. So if you said, I want a baby, you're not getting into the class. And I understand all the reasons why, but that's not good work, right? Because a lot of people come through classes that want babies and end up with a teenager, right? We know that, we've seen it happen time and time again. So we needed to change orientation, we needed to change our training slides. They also all had codes in them, administrative codes in them. Great. And then interviews. I incorporated interviews. That was one of the things that I stole from North Carolina. So after they fill out this survey, bring them in. Talk them through it. Build a relationship. And that was new for my staff, and they struggled with it. And then, because I wanted to kind of check their work without checking it, draft me a one-page summary on who they are, why do you think they're great for the class, and let's talk through it. And what I found was, I had a lot of work to do with my staff. So I was spending a lot of time training the case management organizations, but my staff they were tough. So if one mom said, I'm a stay-at-home mom and I'd love to homeschool my adopted child, they would say, I have 5 minutes. They would say, well, she's gonna be a helicopter parent. And literally put that in the note that they sent me. So, we couldn't do that, right? And I said, what's wrong with being a helicopter parent for a child who's never had really a parent in that way? Let's talk through that. There was a lot of judgments that we had to work through. So family engagement strategies, real quick overview. We provided a child summary prior to the match. So families were coming to the match meetings, now we got them in the room, but they didn't know anything about the kid. And my staff used the excuse of, well, that's a HIPAA violation. We'll have them sign something and then share. All prospective adoptive families will be interviewed prior to participating in our adoption training. We'll complete all studies within 60 days. We'll provide adoptive families a signed copy of their adoption home study and be okay if they want to use it somewhere else. We had to be okay with that. Upload adoption home studies timely, match events in partnership with the Heart Gallery of Tampa, and then we needed to assess the needs of transracially adopted youth and their families and provide training. So, my PICO was, did we actually accomplish what we wanted to? And so I had to go back. So just a little tidbit, my work started really in January, right? Right after I left this. Right after I left this meeting, I started looking back. And so after we implemented all the changes that we made in January, and we tracked it till June, I needed to go back. And this was the last piece of data that I collected because I was afraid that we might not have hit it. But we did. What you can see is in 2018, 35, from January to June, 35 children of color were adopted, right? That's great. And with the strategic initiatives that we put into place, 55 from just January to June, which is why I say we need more time with this work, right? We need more time to be part of this process so that we can gather more data. 55 kids were able to be moved into families. Thank you. And subsequently, it didn't just meet the needs for children of color, but From July to December, we had 108 adoptions. After we implemented strategic initiatives, we were able to move 188 children into families. So that was great. And so what's next? We're going to develop an in-house training for families about transracial adoption, right? And meeting their needs that way. But we're also going to continue to partner with the Heart Gallery of Tampa and Family Match regarding our recruitment efforts for children of color. I'm having really great conversations with the Heart Gallery about how are they mapping out how children of color specifically are being displayed and viewed. And she realized, you know what, I think we have a problem. And it was because I gave her that disproportionality rate too. I'm telling you, share that, sharing is knowledge, and it moves the work. Roll out the transracial adoption training. We're gonna continue to track progress of this action research project so all of this stays in place. And all we're gonna do is enhance it. None of this is changing. And then we're gonna seek ways to enhance partnerships with One Church, One Child of Tampa. They've had a lot of turnover. And that's one of the reasons why I wasn't able to even talk about the work we've done with them, because we're just starting over again on that end. And I think I kind of talked to death about some of our challenges, but areas of growth for us were definitely a big piece. What I wanted to share is that we do an adoption state survey, and Valerie was gracious enough to send this to me. One of the things that I noticed was that, and this is a survey sent to adoptive families, was that it indicated that families were satisfied with the adoption process, but not the adoption support. And that goes back to engagement, which is why we're really strategic in looking at that. And then we want to enhance transracial adoption support. In the end, what did I learn? To be brave in sharing difficult information. I love managing up. And that I'm a transformational leader. I think that was one of the most valuable things for me. And I want to make sure my staff become transformational leaders too. References, questions? Oh my gosh, I made it.
The success of any of this depends on the staff. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested in how did the staff respond to your changes? Was it total sabotage or what?
There was some of that. So I was hired as an outsider, so that was a big shift, right? Here she comes from her hoity-toity North Carolinian world, right? And a lot of this, a lot of things that I bring to the table are because of how we did adoptions in North Carolina. So yeah, there was a lot of resistance, but I had to remind myself, they don't trust you because they don't know you. So it took time to build relationships. And I'll tell you, a year after, on my anniversary of being there and surviving everything we survived, one of my staff members came into the room. She goes, "Is anybody around?" And I was like, no. And she was like, "Okay, just want to let you know, you were so brave to come back day after day after day." And I just want to thank you for showing me what it means to be brave in this work. I've never had a leader like that before. And that was huge for me. So build trust and they will follow, right? They will align. And I gave them space to tell me, I see your vision, but that's not gonna work here, and here are the reasons why, right? So I gave them space to be able to have those hard conversations with me. And sometimes, they just had to do what I said.
I don't think she's giving herself enough credit. She came into an area that was under national spotlight, that if anyone told her fully, she probably would have ran. Because of privatized areas do things differently, and unfortunately she came into an area that had a lot of challenges. So when she said she rebranded, re-engaged, and really moved forward practices and got rid of some very bad practices, she did. And then on top of that, they did adoptions in-house. Mm-hmm. And then so she got all new providers, contracted agencies, and she had to go out and train and retrain and then train again. So she's doing excellent work. I'm so proud of her. So I just wanted you guys.
She's my mentor, y'all.